too bad, all things considered. Although I can't say the same for the Flyers on their homestand right now.
Yeah, I had to endure that. And this is going to be a show of basically crushed hopes and dreams and falling stars. And
Oh, this is right up your alley then.
this is, and with all of that, we bring in Michael Jello. Mike, how are you?
Joy to the world. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, Mike's in this perpetual state of, it's getting close.
Misery. Perpetual state of frigging misery.
Time, the elevator is dropping out of the shaft like in LA Law. It's just not going to be good.
For those who remember what that show is.
How do we eliminate 3 people from the cast? Just have them fall down an elevator shaft. There you go.
God. Just Google it.
Just awful writing.
Stephen Bochco, but anyway,
we'll get to the one that's going to be lengthy here, and that is the Toronto Maple Leafs, who seemingly have, the Tampa Bay Lightning on their heels. And I will tell you what I think is interesting about the Lightning is they probably have been under the radar this year about how good their team is, in the sense that we've all sort of been conditioned that, hey, they've won the cup, they've been there a bunch of times, now they're just this team that maybe you'll never get back, but I think they are good enough to get back. And so now, if they were to get home ice in the playoffs for at least the first round, that's a big deal. And so that, Mike, would impact the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't know, are they starting to crack under the pressure of that? That's what I wonder.
Russ, they're not even thinking about the Tampa Bay Lightning. Right now, they're thinking about the fact that the Ottawa Senators are 4 points behind them, that they could fall into the first wild card. That's how badly that they've played over the last stretch. And it's not just like a little blip. Their struggles started probably a little bit after the Four Nations, and it's going along with the struggles of their star players, especially Austin Matthews. Austin Matthews until yesterday had scored 1 5-on-5 goal in the last 16 games. And the goal that he scored yesterday was basically an empty netter because Linus Ullmark came out of the crease and flubbed it. So, and I'm not putting it all on Matthews, even though I've made some comments on Twitter, and everybody was like, well, it's Matthews' fault. It's not one person's fault.
No.
This is a multi-system failure, like it always is. I don't know why Craig Berube is hitched his wagon to Anthony Stolarz, but
Anthony and I have insight as to why he hitches his wagons to certain goalies. We've seen it in action.
Okay, well,
I'm trying to remember in terms of the timeline for him and Stolarz and the Flyers organization.
It wasn't Stolarz, but it was with Mason and how he didn't want to play Mason after a while, and that became like a thing. And
I think Berube looks for a certain mindset, and I don't think it's all that different from the current Flyer current Flyer coach either. Is that they want their goaltenders to be sort of steel traps.
Yeah.
And nothing. They want them to be completely unflappable. I don't think they want to have
Mason and Ray Emery, right? That they were bouncing back and forth with.
And Emery, of course, has more of that that mentality. Whereas again, but of the two goalies, talent, and there's no question Mason was the better. I think the better talent of the two. But the problem for Mason was always, sometimes the management of upstairs after that incredible rookie season he had.
Well, call me old fashioned, but what I expect out of my goaltender is to stop the friggin' puck. And, Anthony Stolarz really, over the last 2 games, and ironically, Berube broke his rotation and played Stolarz in arguably the 2 biggest games of the year against Florida and against Ottawa on Saturday night, and he didn't come up big. You want to see what a number 1 goaltender looks like? Look at what Ullmark did in the third period of that game, leading 3-2. He made 3 or 4 really big saves to save that game for the Senators. And I'm not disputing that Stolarz has talent. I'm not disputing that he's been more consistent of the 2 goalies, but he's not a number 1.
Nobody in the world before this season or any season thought he was a number one.
Yeah, just
but
because
why
he put up
in the world would this guy think he's a
This
number
is what
one?
I'm going to say.
You know why, Russ? Because he put up great stats with the team that won the friggin' Stanley Cup.
Okay.
Zippity doodah.
Well,
So did Rolly Melanson with the Islanders. So what?
All right. So my theory on this is that this was a testing of Stolarz in a big moment. And Berube has to recognize the situation and realize Stoli is a good number. I think he's a good, solid number 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he should, if he's being smart here, taking this information and realizing, we tried it with Anthony. We wanted to see how he did. He did in a big moment in what would be a moment for us in the season. Didn't quite give us what we needed. So you have to also now be willing to make the adjustment after this to recognize this and be able to say, we need to give Wall his run here.
And a couple things that really sort of perturbed me, which shocking. They make the trade for Brandon Carlo, and everybody's saying this is Carlo to pair with Morgan Riley, and they pair him with Morgan Riley.
Yeah,
but on defensive zone faceoffs, they have Riley with Carlo. On offensive zone faceoffs, they sub in Oliver Ekman-Larsson, 2 lefties, and then they screw up their old defensive pairs. If you wonder why Morgan Riley is having a bad year, I mean, it's on him partially, but it's also the fact that he's had like 5,000 defensive partners. Would you please stick with one guy so he can learn how to play with that guy rather than
how many games? Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Russ. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say. I mean, Carlo's not offensive, so they're trying to maximize everything.
That's the one thing about Carlo is that I was gonna say he's not. This is where I'm gonna probably not go after Berube's decision making here. Is that he's trying? I think Mike, he's trying to figure this thing out still. The players, your systems are different and all different. I think this is an early stretch, and they have to say, okay, we have to kind of experiment to see what we think will click. Mm-hmm. So that involves, I think, early on, at least maybe how many games are we in so far? How many games has Carlo played so far?
4 or 5.
I think we're getting to the point now. Once you're about 5 games in, then you should be like, okay, we got a sample. Now this is how we're going to do it.
But here's the main problem. In the 2 biggest games of the year, or at least, that's recency bias, but let's just say that they were. Mm-hmm. They scored 2 goals in both games. A team that is spending $40 million on 4 players, and you can say, well, that doesn't matter. And yes, it does, because you expect them to score. Now, Marner has had a good year, but of late in big games, he's a ghost. So it's like when it comes to playoff type hockey, he has disappeared. The only one of the 4 who has played well, I think, is John Tavares. Austin Matthews, there's something off with him. He's flubbing shots. He's mishandling. He had a goal yesterday, but it was basically an empty net. There's something going on. He's just off. He's like I said, I think he has 4 goals in the last 17 games, and one of them was an empty net. One of them was a power play. So Nylander, he goes through his streaks. He's amazing at times, and then he disappears. He's second in the league in goals, but lately he hasn't scored. And this team, if those guys don't produce, they don't win. And that's the problem. They're not producing when it comes down. And Berube mixed up the lines. He put Max Domi, who had a good game against Florida, on the top line. He put Nylander down on the third line. He put Marner with Tavares. Nothing worked. And then in the third period, he put Marner back with Matthews because he's trying to tie the game. I mean, they're not generating offense. They're not particularly good defensively. They're penalty killing. They had a stat on the game last night. Since late January, they're 30th on the PK, and they gave up 2 Sam Bennett goals on the power play against Florida on Thursday. And the game winner from Ridley Gregg was a power play goal right in front of the net. So their PK is in shambles. Their power play isn't producing. Other than that, it's great. I mean, I'll tell you right now, they're playing this 5-forward power play with Marner as the point guy. And there was a breakaway yesterday. I mark my words, that is going to come back to screw them in the playoffs. I'm sorry, Morgan Riley's not having a good year, and he doesn't have big shot from the point. So if he doesn't work, Oliver Ekman-Larsson is a fine point guy on the power play. Use a defenseman, because I'm telling you right now.
I would use Larson. I would.
Yeah,
he's still really good at. even though he's rehabbed his game for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's still got a pretty decent shot. He's still got some offensive chops.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot go with 5 forwards. I mean, I know that your best 5 players are your 5 forwards and you want Nyes out there, but it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. And it's
I've never been a huge fan of the 5 forward. I know I've never been a fan of the 5 forward power play. It's just there's too much danger on the back end of it, I feel like, going back the other way. And okay, fine. How do you compensate for that? Well, have somebody on the point that's moderately decent defensively. But the instincts to cover on those kind of plays, you need at least one. I always feel like you need at least one D who can cover on the back end on a.
I'll tell you, the last time I thought that was a good idea was with the Sabres, Mike, when they had their high-powered team. Yeah. That worked.
You're talking about the Briere Drury era.
Briere Drury, Vanek. I think J.P. Dumont and Connolly.
That worked. I see. But beyond that, no.
But Russ, they only use that on 5-on-3s, and I get that because the other team is not going to go the other way. But on a regular 5-on-4 power play, it's dangerous. Now, I'll just say this because the subterfuge and everything that's going around outside of the rink, that can wait until the off season. But
what's subterfuge? This is not like we're not in a Cold War here. This is not like.
Will you let me make my point, please?
Go ahead, Mike.
Stop.
It's a little dramatic.
Okay, but no, I'm talking about the whole Marner stuff, the waiving of the no trade and all that stuff. I mean, you could ignore it if you didn't think it was a distraction. And based on the way he has played since the deadline and since it got out, it's a distraction. Steve Simmons' column in the Toronto Sun today, I think went point by point. Basically, who's leaking all this information? It's Carolina. And why are they leaking the information? Because asking for Marner makes them look good in terms of getting something for Rantanen. I get that. So, according to Steve Simmons, Marner waited for 24 hours, thought about it, and then said, no, I don't want to waive my new move. I want to stay in Toronto. But his agent will not negotiate with him. So, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I'll say it. Mitch Marner does not want to play in Toronto unless he gets overpaid. Simmons said he is tired of being the media and the fans' piñata. Well, you know what, Mitch? Friggin' show up. Show up and put egg on my face because right now you're useless.
Absolutely useless. Now. Maybe you should find something else. Eggs are very expensive at the moment.
I was going to say, I wouldn't go with eggs at the moment. Maybe we'll put some peanut butter on you.
Peanut butter. Eggs are cheaper. But seriously, you want to shut up the fans and shut up the media from the criticism from everything over the last few years that you don't show up in the playoffs. Then show up.
Has he actively verbally complained about this, Mike, or is this just everybody's interpretation?
Well, no, he won't talk to the media. That's the thing. And of course they know not to ask him about the contract because he said at the beginning of the year, I'm not talking about the contract. And Darren Ferris apparently says, we're not talking contract until the end of the season.
Okay, here's Mike, we grew up in New York, so we understand. And Anthony, they did do some of this in Philly, but it seemed like in New York, this was all the time in almost every sport I followed. This always happens when a player's contract is going to be up. A lot of times in baseball it was with the manager, but in sports, it's happened a lot. Mm-hmm. So this is not really surprising.
No, it's not surprising. And like I said, it's all this distraction. But I will tell you this, and I've heard some people and people that I respect say that the results of the playoffs, what happens with the Leafs, and we'll get off the Leafs after this. The results of the playoffs are meaningless. The Leafs have indicated they want to sign Marner to a point. If they lose in the first round, again, for the 8th time in 9 years,
nobody's counting. It's all
and
right.
The only thing that is not changed throughout all that, they've fired general managers, they've fired coaches, they have different assistant coaches, goaltenders, defense, secondary, everything. The only thing that has stayed the same is that core four. The only thing, and Brendan Shanahan, who will be gone if they lose in the first round because he is the master of the Shana plan. You cannot keep.
I haven't heard that phrase in a while. The Shanna plan.
Yeah, we haven't heard
You cannot.
I've heard the Iser plan more than the Shanna plan.
Yeah, you cannot keep that group together, and you may not have any choice because Marner may just want to leave town and go to play in Utah where nobody will criticize him. Well, if you
could have gone to Carolina.
Yeah, could have gone
to criticizing him in Carolina if we're going to if you're using that theory.
Anthony, it seems that nobody wants to go to Raleigh. Mikko Rantanen didn't. Jake Gensel didn't. So that
the sky is still blue, Mike, and the ticket prices are still high in Toronto. That we know.
Okay.
All right. So we move on for that. We can talk about Carolina in that respect, and then morph into the Flyers game. But it is true that this isn't all on Eric Tulsky. Like, I know that he's had to sort of do damage control, and he is a new GM, newer, so he's learning the ropes. Mikko Rantanen was just a cautionary tale, and there is some truth to that. Carolina is not the only place that players are not going to play in right now. There's probably a list of like 10 teams players would rather not go to. Philly's one of them. And until teams get better and environments improve or coaches are gone and all of these kinds of situations, this is a fact of life in the NHL.
If you're not winning, you're not going to want to go to a team, basically, especially if you're – and it's under – but again, I think the Flyer – it's again, this offseason is going to be interesting because, again, the expectation of the fan base is going to be this summer, we've put up with several seasons of, kind of transitioning. And the thing is, again, performance-wise, the team is taking a step back this year versus last year, where they were still in the race at this point last year. Whereas now, the numbers, speak out on it right now. They've lost 14 of their last 20 games. I think San Jose is the only team with with fewer points than the Flyers since January 23rd. This was from Jordan Hall's report from NBC Sports, and just looking at those numbers and everything, it's just why would you look at a situation you don't know what the coaching situation is going to be here. So if you look at all the factors that it very much depends on, I think, if John Tortorella decides, okay, I'm going to make that move upstairs into management here, and that, and then whoever the coach is that they potentially hire, that can be a factor in regards to whether or not certain players, again, the Flyers, if they're going to be able to, they're not going to be able to, it's not a free agency situation. We just sign a guy and then, all your problems are solved. They're going to have to make some kind of a trade for a player. And then whoever that young player is, convince him that this is going to be a place where you can make a big difference for. And I think there's potential for the Flyers, but I do believe messaging is a part of it. You hear what some of the players who've exited, we saw what Joel Farabee said when he was in town, that whether or not the coach trusts you in circumstances. Right. They want to have some agency in this case. And this is the one area where I feel like, where I think if the Flyers are going to attract potential, players and younger players to sign on here eventually, I think there will need to be a change in regards to who's running the bench.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it. But again, getting down to it, Russ, it's just the Flyers at the moment. I still think there's still a major market. I still think you can get somebody but it depends on how the ship is being run and how those players look at it and say, okay, where are you at as a team? What is your win? What are you looking at? Are you going to be competing in the next, 3, 4, 5 years? Anybody who's coming up on like a Rantanen or somebody that's going to look and go, I'm trying to win another championship here. It's not going to happen if I go to Philadelphia.
So as an example, the thing that probably made me maddest about yesterday's game is I look at the lineup and I know that it's been hard for Emil Andre to get in the lineup, but they have him playing on his offside. It's like, why don't you have Nick Seeler playing on his offside? Why are you having Andre, a young guy?
I feel like Torts is still kind of – I think they're still kind of experimenting a bit with Andre.
Right, why experiment on that? That's the least thing he's going to be comfortable.
They're not competing for a playoff spot.
Right,
so if you're not competing for a spot, why just experiment?
Be an NHLer, like playing the offside.
Okay.
Not a way of doing that.
Okay, and it's a game that he's done it, and then this is part of the experimenting and seeing what Andre can do if he's on that other side. And if you kind of stick with that over a long period of time, other players, I agree with you, other players should be willing to to make that sort of that switch. But I'm not going to. I know you were looking at that last night, and I understand why it doesn't seem to play to his strengths. But I also feel like this is a team that's trying things out and seeing, and they're not. Again, we know where they're at. The players know where they're at. They got to win. If they're going to win games, they got to win like 2-1.
Right.
They don't have the talent, the prerequisite talent at this point up front.
Well,
and they seem. Go ahead, Mike.
The interesting dichotomy here is you have a coach that wants to win with a team that wants to rebuild,
right?
And that is on ownership and management. If they wanted to rebuild, your first move, and I've said this forever, was firing John Tortorella. Now the thing is, Tortorella may have too much power for that. And if he does, then don't try to rebuild, then try to reset. Now, the one advantage.
But the question was, what were they resetting with?
Well, I mean, a couple years ago, they tried to sign Johnny
and I know. And then Torts also has sort of the, a lot of players aren't necessarily going to want to come because it's like Torts is as old, as old school as it comes. And the guys who lock in on that, they like that, but there's also that. But
that's the issue. Anthony.
There's also lack of communicate. There's also the Cam York basically saying, I don't know why. And we've had situations where players say, I don't understand why the coach. For there's no. We're at that point here where it's just I feel like with Torts, and I think when Torts signed on, the Flyers roster still was competitive,
right.
A team that could potentially do something, and things have changed since then, but then they were locked in. And I also have to take into account, there is a budget with regards to how much you pay coaches, and you still had a very hefty contract on Alain Vigneault. I think that they were still in the process of paying off on. So at that point, I felt like they were probably looking at it and saying, all right, let's make the best of the situation. There's good, strong habits that Torts and his staff and can develop players. And I felt like this whole this situation was less about, it's about how do we develop some of the younger players into being like reliable, strong defensive NHL players. And
I think
I feel like it's like, this is just my read on, is that they were trying to make the best of the situation, knowing there's this weird dynamic of a coach who in theory is on his last run and wants to win. And then the actual reality of the situation.
I think your issue here is they're going to have a boatload of cap space in the summer. You're now in a recruiting sort of situation where I think John Tortorella, it's like Bobby Knight. It's like it's tough to get recruits to, Bobby Knight won NCAA championships, but he's a hard ass and nobody wants to play for a hard ass. So it dried up at Indiana and then it dried up at Texas Tech. He couldn't get players anymore. Yeah. And that's the problem here. And I'm not saying
Torts is still let's put it this way. If Torts is still the head coach and they're trying to get this sort of recruitment drive going. And again, the problem is, again, where they're at in terms of what recruitment, you're looking at, like, what's available in the free agent market.
Well, it's not going to be the unrestricted free agent.
No, it's going to be restricted free agent. But I even think in that circumstance, it's more the threat of an RFA situation or an offer sheet, where I think this is where Danny Briere is going to have to kind of hold the threat of an offer sheet over a team and try to get some kind of a trade with one of the teams that, has an RFA that they might identify as being someone who can help their team move along.
Had Wyatt Johnston not signed that 5-year extension, that would have been somebody to go after. Probably a Mason.
Well, the question is whether or not a Wyatt Johnston's going to want to go from that situation he's at in Dallas,
unless he gets over,
especially money making wise.
I mean, would Mason McTavish want to go from sunny Anaheim to Philadelphia? And it
comes down to whether or not Anaheim, if Anaheim identifies Mason McTavish, that's up to Anaheim. And the thing is, you have to be strategic with regards to that too. It would be almost I feel like with Anaheim and their cap space, that to me, they would have to go to Anaheim and if they really liked McTavish and see him as a top 6 center for them. I'm not saying first line center, but like a really good, for them, he would be a top line center, but you have to kind of convince Anaheim to come off of that. And not too many teams are going to give up your top 6 center unless, and this is the key, you're hard up to the cap. And that's where Danny Briere is going to do anything with regards to acquiring a player and a younger player who's in a restricted free agent market, he's going to have to target a team that's going to be in a cap, that's going to be in somewhat of a cap crunch, and structure that deal and say, hey, let's try to make a deal first. Let's make a trade and find out what your other areas are before we get to the point of doing a poison pill offer sheet or something like that.
And I don't think the Flyers are going to go down this road, because this player in Philadelphia, the way he's playing right now, would be a disaster, and that's Pettersson, because he has no. Yeah,
I'm between the contract and the way he has played. Yes. To me, I feel like Pettersson's incredibly talented, but there's something going on there. There's something that has to be figured out, because he's just not playing at the level he had before. And you'd have to have a situation and a coach. And again, one of the things this summer potentially that you're looking at here, if the Flyers, do go into a different coaching route, is there's a distinct possibility that Rick Tocchet might be a potential candidate.
Yeah,
damn well that in that case, there's no way it's going to be Pettersson.
Well, and I'll just say this just to bring the first two subjects that we talked about together. I mean, Mitch Marner is going to go. He's going to hit that open market. Mm-hmm. I do not think, and I could be wrong, but I'm just saying, I do not think if he's going someplace other than Toronto, it's going to be Boston, who's got a ton of cap space, or Philadelphia, or the Rangers. There is no way, because now you could say that the media scrutiny is not as bad in those three cities than it is in Toronto, but it's close.
The thing for Philly is the fact that you're almost, again, Marner's a right wing. Philly has got a lot of wings. So the only way I could see it happening is that the Flyers decided to move off of one of their wingers,
right,
as part, and they look at it as a twofold thing where they get the center and then see Marner as and then see. So I can't say no to that, Mike. I can't completely, but you are looking at. I'm looking whatever your cap situation is and where you are competing.
And Marner is a center playing the wing. He's a playmaking winger. And
I do wonder whether or not Philly would look at that and say, "Hey, we're gonna, and make that experiment and say, Mitch, in terms of your skill set, would you like to trying to play the pivot?
Yeah, we have
trying to be center."
But I'll just make a guess and then we move. If I had to guess, Marner is going to end up in Utah or Los Angeles.
Yeah, I have felt Utah is the place. I don't know.
I could see them or LA. LA is another possibility as well, because it's just kind of the right window there. It's it's LA. That being said, in terms of taxes and everything else that you have to consider,
right?
And you have to anymore with any free agent contract. I think people are suddenly realizing, crap, when you get into that free agent market, the players looking to maximize every cent they can get, and there's other places and other options where they could make a substantial amount of money and compete.
So another story that's interesting is the Rangers shut out Columbus. They got a little closer. I still don't fully believe in them, but I will say this. Peter Laviolette, he's in a weird, interesting spot as a coach, because you get Chris Drury. He goes out and gets Carson Soucy. Soucy was already scratched. Like, he already got scratched for that game. And again, we all looked at that like, what is Carson Soucy going to add in the regular season? I understand if it gets to the playoffs, sure, he could play that half-court kind of game, but he has no speed, and why'd you get him? So then the one guy who kept getting scratched early this year and not playing a lot was Zach Jones. Now Zach Jones playing 18 minutes a game, which they could have been doing all season. It is impossible to figure out how that team's getting coached. And people are up and down about Shesterkin, which they shouldn't be, because Shesterkin's a terrific goalie. But they have all this other stuff going on. I don't know if they're going to make it. But Peter Laviolette is just like, I don't know. He can't settle on anything.
No, I mean, and based on the fact that the Rangers roster has been a frigging revolving door this year. I mean, I've never seen a team transition from a successful team from the previous year to move out essentially half their roster, which they've done. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. If I'm the Washington Capitals, I don't want the Rangers to finish in that last spot. Not
agree
because,
with that.
yeah, because I mean, we know Shesterkin can steal a series.
Right.
We know that they have playoff hardened performers. There's talent there. They may not be coalescing at this moment right now, but if they sneak in, I don't want to play them. I mean, I don't think they can go all the way based on the chaos that's going on at Madison Square Garden. But Anthony, I mean, like I say, if you're playing JT Miller and Panarin and Kreider and Fox and, keep going on, that's a friggin' scary team.
Yeah, exactly. It should be. And it's a team that, it's weird. It's like, this is almost reminding me a little bit of 2010 with the Flyers. Remember how it's a little bit like they're in trouble. They may or may not make it.
Right.
Thing is that the door opened and the expectations are not high. That's when the Rangers could potentially go on a run. That's the part I have to keep in the back of my mind. And what's the common denominator here? Right. Peter Laviolette.
Right. He is.
And that's the thing I have to keep in mind. So I am reticent to count the Rangers out until they are out.
No, that's fair. I mean,
I do feel like I want to be fair to a team that has a lot of talent, that I feel like has a lot of they have the guys that I look at and I go, they could do some damage in the playoffs, especially if teams are overlooking them.
Right. If they make it,
which is tough to do with the New York Rangers.
Yeah.
Mind you.
So, Pierre LeBrun came out with some interesting information. I guess he got from Gary Bettman. I was pretty sure of that.
Mm-hmm.
That we could see an 84-game schedule and no All-Star game in 2026. I mean, the All-Star game, hey, like we know they're volleying that around. That's not shocking to anybody. The 84-game schedule is a little bit weird because it's like,
well, I would be like, here's the thing with an 84. Get Mike, you first. Go ahead.
I know why, because I even though math was my worst subject, with an 84-game schedule and a 32-team league, it's 4 games against your own division, 3 games against the other division in your conference, and 2 games against the other conference. So it balances it out. Right now, there are some teams that you're playing in your own division and you're only playing 3 times. Like Toronto and Buffalo are only playing 3 times this year. But I wrote an article for the Hockey News because I heard about this report and I knew that was a motivation and they're talking about this as part of the new CBA. But there's going to be expansion.
Yep.
And that part of the new CBA, I'll bet you on the players, is going to say, how about expanding the playoffs to 20 teams or having a play-in like the NBA for more hockey-related revenue.
Yeah.
And Bettman will push back at this, but I'm sorry, the owners and the players both want to make more money.
Remember when only like 7 teams or 8 teams didn't make the playoffs?
Russ, I remember a 21 team league with 16 teams making it, and that was ridiculous. But we're in a 32 team league, and 16 teams only make it.
I thought about this idea of you don't have a full on play-in tournament, but if you were to go to 84, like whoever the last 2 seeds, like if it would have been the last 2. Would be 8 or 9. You have a home and basically have a home and home.
Yes.
And no ties, have to play to the end and play it like a playoff.
Have a 3-game play.
You could do like a 3-game play-in, almost like a wild, like a wild card where you have we have those teams play a best of 3, or you play all 3 games, or you play the potential all 3 games like MLB does with the wild card series, and have whoever has the higher seed gets to have both of those. Now, again, the physical aspect of it is something else. It could maybe, I think, like a 1-game winner take all to get in. That was always fun in Major League Baseball, which is some reason why the wild card to me has kind of lost a little bit of its luster. But the 1 game was always wild and fun.
The only thing that's interesting about this, it also said that the season would start in September.
Yes.
So May 31st might be like the cup dates. But the only thing is they have to shorten the preseason. Like there's no way they can keep the preseason.
I don't think anybody's going to have any issue. Most leagues at this point now, the NFL, I mean, granted, Major League Baseball, it's its own animal in this case. That's a different thing. So I'm not even going to count that. But
6 to 8 preseason games is absurd. It really is. It's asinine. And they say, well, it's for revenue. Nobody goes. It's like, okay, I used to be a Sabres season ticket holder. You had to pay. You got the preseason games for free. Most markets, that's not the case.
Right.
You have to pay for those tickets, and everybody's giving away because they're bullshit games. They're
between that, it's usually, again, in terms of cost of it, it's full dial cost, and economically in a market like Buffalo, which has 2 pro teams in the and well, counting obviously the Bison and baseball as well, but I look at that and I go, it's the beginning of Bills season, and there's certain amount of money that people are willing to throw around at for certain things.
Yeah, but Anthony, there is a benefit to start. Okay, I understand that you're conflicting with the NFL, but the NFL, even though they're playing,
Mike. What I'm saying is, there's only in terms of. I agree with you. I think there are too many preseason games.
Right, too many preseason games, and I've always heard, well, the NHL doesn't want to start the season early because they'll be conflicting with college football and the NFL. It's one game, like if it's the Bills, it's one day a week.
Right.
I'm sorry. It's like you play, because the bull crap that this schedule is right now, because you had to fit in the 4 nations. I mean, if the season started on October 1st, then you wouldn't have teams playing 5 games in 8 days. And you're going to have exhausted teams going into the playoffs, which is what everybody is waiting for and everybody watches. And if you're going to have substandard games because these players are exhausted, that's on the NHL and it's on the PA for agreeing to this crap.
Sure. So, Mike, the good news about this for like Sabres fans is, hey, the season ends earlier, their summer starts sooner. I mean, they're used to that already. They don't have to worry about playoffs.
Yeah, the dynamic in Buffalo is bizarre. I think it was they lost 6 of 7 coming into the game yesterday against Vegas, but the one win that they had was against Edmonton. So they beat Edmonton and they beat Vegas in the shootout yesterday. And I have to say this. There is something that I think maybe this is sort of an oxymoronic statement, but it's sort of call it selfish selflessness. And Tomas Hertl was the offender yesterday. The Jack Eichel scores the goal to put Vegas up 3-2 late in the third period, and believe me, he was hot dogging it with mustard and ketchup. I mean, he was enjoying it because he wanted to stick it to the Buffalo fans who were booing him every time. And, we know the history. Okay, so the Sabres pull Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Hertl has a break, and he could have backhanded it into the open net. It looked like he had a clear shot to the goal. Peyton Krebs was chasing him. And instead, he tries to make a back pass to Eichel to get Eichel the empty net goal to win the game. What happens? The pass gets deflected by Krebs. They come down, 13 seconds left, and Dahlin ties the game with a nice one-timer slap shot, and then the Sabres win it in the shootout. And it's like, I didn't hear the audio, but the disgust on Bruce Cassidy's face after that game spoke volumes. Like, even though they're going to win first place, stick that bull crap. It's like, score the goal, win the game. Don't dilly-dally. Don't do this bull. But they did. But for the Sabres, it's playing out the string. It's like, get the golf clubs ready. It's like, now they're gonna try to say, well, we have things to accomplish. What? Honestly, you'd be better off losing the last 16, 17 games and having a better chance at Schaefer or Hagens in the draft. But they're gonna do this crap where, we have to end on a positive note. You've already blown your season with a 13-game losing streak and then losing 6 of 7. I mean, your season is done. And I understand that you can't think that way if you're a player, but the organization, they're doing a disservice to the Sabres right now, playing the same guys that they played all season, not calling up Roseanne.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not even call. Yeah, maybe not even.
Those certainly at this point now, they should be certain players that should be getting called up. And again, maybe we see them in the next week or so as they go down the stretch and things happen and they go, okay, let's see what we have here. I could see that at that point, but
But this is Lindy. I mean, we're talking about
Lindy. In some way, Lindy and Torts are cut from the same old school cloth.
Playing Nick Delorier, so like Lindy's doing the same.
Well, I mean, Delorier's playing because
Well, if why is he playing?
He's getting.
Well, Russ,
he's in the Hathaway role, but he can't even do half of what Hathaway
well,
does.
if there was somebody in Buffalo who could play the Nick Delorier role, he would be playing right now. They traded that guy in Dennis Gilbert, and then yesterday, Yuri Kulich gets hammered by Howden.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Peyton Krebs had to drop the gloves to fight. And I give Krebs a lot of credit because Howden's a bigger guy and he didn't exactly win the fight. And then Jordan Greenway, who's not a fighter, picks Keegan Colasar to fight. I mean, honestly,
that's a tough guy to pick to fight.
You should, and he's not a good player. He's a career AHLer, but you should call up Josh Dunn from Rochester. If you need somebody as an enforcer to protect your players, then at least that guy can do it. But your guys are getting laid out. Tage Thompson's getting laid out. Josh Norris is getting laid out. And you don't really have anybody, it's team toughness and they're responding. But you really need a guy who can do that who can respond.
Hey, look, don't worry. The Bills signed Joey Bosa. They're ready for the Super Bowl. It's all
Oh, yes. And they also signed two guys who failed the PED test, so they're suspended for the first 6 games. So darn.
Don't worry about it.
But one note on Norris here. I mean, everybody said, well, Norris is the more talented of the two players, but Norris can't stay healthy. 3 games, and he's hurt.
We came in with an injury, apparently.
He came in with an injury. He came in and he played 3 games before he was traded. And now they said it was something that was lingering, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah, acquisition. It's the old story. Josh Norris. It's acquisition cost. You acquire him, and you acquire every ding he's ever had,
and his medical history. Yes,
it's exactly the same rain cloud that's lingering over Buffalo. That's just the way it is. Yeah. That's it for Up the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.